Constitution and how it is a trust and what that is. So yesterday on my Financial Ninjas live, I I went into depth on the whole structure of trusts and how they can protect your assets, protect your family, protect your wealth, how they can help you to mitigate and defer taxes, and a bit about how and why they do that, why they're able to do that. Why is a trust structure so powerful and it has been in use for hundreds of years? So the trust structure was originally created, uh, apparently, in 1533. And why the nobles in England used this structure because they were tired of the king coming in and taking their property and their lands while they went off to war or to fight for the king, or where the king could come in, and it would leave their beneficiaries, their children, their families just out in the cold. So the structure of the trust was created where one party holds title to the property, and but they hold it for the benefit of someone else. So you don't have, typically when you have ownership, you have both title and beneficial ownership in one person, and this constitute true ownership or fee simple ownership. So this is under law, this is under contract law. Trusts are contracts. And in the US, right, one of the fundamental principles in our Constitution is that the government cannot restrict people's right to contract, right? So this is in the framework when we talk about the contract and the what are the five fundamental qualities of a contract that must exist for it to be a valid contract. But our right is the right to contract, the right to make a deal, right, to exchange services, to exchange money. And that right is baked into our Constitution. The Constitution itself, however, is a contract. And it's unique. And when it was created, it was a very unique way to form government. It was a contract for the people, right? And by the people. So the leaders got together and they created a contract of the Constitution, holding the government, the land in trust for who? For the people. The people are the beneficial owners of this contract, of the assets that are in the contract, of the rights that are in this contract. So the Constitution was a contract, and they wrote up, this is how we should be governed. This is the powers. And all of this is for the beneficial ownership of the beneficial use of the people. Okay. And in any trust, when you have a trust and they're trying to make decisions about how that trust should function or be used, oftentimes many, many years after the death of the person who created the trust. So when a person creates a trust, they take their property, they put it into the trust now owns the property, and they have a contract where they say, this person is the trustee. They hold title to the trust, to the property that's in the trust. They're allowed to buy or sell it. They're allowed to manage it, right? Depending on the contract, the trustee may have certain powers or not have certain powers, but it's all based on what the actual contract says. The beneficial purpose of that contract is to care for the beneficiaries. So the beneficiaries have the right to use the asset or benefit from the asset, right? So the purpose of that trust is to create a care for the beneficiaries. And so the trustee cannot just do whatever they want with the assets that are in that trust. They have to follow the wishes of the person who created the trust, who created the contract, who put the property into the trust. And so it is similar with the Constitution, where we look at the Constitution, we say, what were the founders thinking? This is why we always go back and we ask, what were the founders thinking when they created this document? and we try to match the intent. When we're creating new laws, we're trying to match the intent. What was the intent of the founders when they created this Constitution, when they gave these rights to the beneficiaries? What was their intent? And the government is supposed to be the trustee. Now, what do we have going on right now? And we've had it happen many times, in our history. And this is why we have the courts, who are the highest, the Supreme Court, which is the court that determines constitutional matters and says, okay, this goes against the intent of the people who wrote the Constitution, who created this trust. So we're going to strike down this law. So what was the original intent of the founders when they created the Constitution? And they created this country and these laws to hold this in trust for the people. Well, they say it right there, right? We have the rights to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. We have the right to contract. We have the right, all of the stuff in the Bill of Rights and in the Constitution is creating the rights that we as American citizens hold and we have the benefit of. So when they create laws that violate that intention of the Constitution, right, they're going against the trust that was created. And even the word trust is very powerful. It's literally called what it is, the thing you're doing. You are trusting or entrusting your property to somebody in order to fulfill a particular purpose. So the trustee is the person who is given this trust, and they have to hold this trust as a sacred duty. They are fiduciary. They have to make sure that when they are managing the trust assets, they are doing it with the right intent and for the purpose that the trust was created and for the benefit of the people who are the trust, who are the beneficiaries of the trust. So all the language tells you exactly what it is. It's trust. It's being held in trust. You have to be trustworthy, right? The person has to trust you as the trustee. You hold that trust and you have to fulfill according to that trust. So what happens when a trustee or our own government starts trying to go against the values of that trust, the intent of that trust, right? That's when the Supreme Court steps in and says, no, that is not the intent of the people who created this trust, of the trustees, of the grantor of this trust, right? That is not the intent of the contract. We got together, we created this contract, we put in these terms of the contract that this is how we should be governed, and this is for the people, for the benefit of the people, right? But anytime a trustee tries to take too much power to themselves and starts trying to manipulate the assets or control the beneficiaries in a way that was not the intention of the original grantor or the trustee, they are violating that trust. So the trust is one of the oldest structures, in existence as far as a contract or a way of ownership. There was just absolute ownership, fee simple. There was the king owned everything, right? And then there was the trust. And the trust was in use far before any kind of companies or corporations or anything like that, because the trust was an organization and a relationship based on contract. And so that is why when the Constitution was created, it actually made space for trusts, right? Because the Constitution itself was a trust. This is why they said you cannot violate people's right to contract or right to put in trust, because a lot of companies were trusts, okay? They only started to create this sort of pseudo entity type of companies, which were corporations, S corps, C corps, limited liability companies. So the C corp and these types of corporate organizations created by legislation only came into effect relatively recently, right? In like 1930s is when they were first created. Before that, all of these types of organizations were trusts. And even later on, The largest are there were railroad trusts, the oil trusts, right? The absolute largest organizations and entities that existed in America were all held in trust because the government couldn't break them up and disperse them in the same way that they could just a regular company, which was owned by somebody, right? Because in trust, you don't have beneficial ownership and title ownership held in the same person. So you would have to have everyone agree, all the trustees, all the beneficiaries, everybody would have to get together and agree to change that trust. And even then, depending on the law, they may not be able to because the contract was given and that property was given with that intent and with those specific things. And it's a contract. You can't just go in and be like, oh, well, I don't like terms of this contract, I'm going to change it, right? So that would be a breach of the contract. And then you would not have a right to those assets anymore because you breached the contract, you see? So this is how that trust system is occurred and why it is such a powerful thing. The courts understand that there are particular types of trusts that have been around for hundreds of years, like spendthrift trusts, and these trusts that are created in contract that the court recognizes that they have no jurisdiction to change or to legislate. Now, these fundamental type of trusts that are pure contract-based trusts are different from legislative trusts. So just like legislation created the corporate entity, they created an LLC, they created a C Corp, just like it created these corporate entities for specific purposes, right? For specific business and taxation purposes. This is why legislations created these entities. And so these entities, because they are legislative, they can be changed by legislation. So the legislation created them, the legislation can change the rules based on them. When someone creates a contract, the government, unless those provisions it's fraudulent, right? The government cannot go in and say, I'm going to change your contract. That would be the government overreaching, unless the contract is in some way fraudulent or violating people's rights, right? You can't have a contract to do something illegal. You cannot have a contract for slavery, for instance, okay? Because that's a violation of the fundamental rights. So, but other than that, the government is not supposed to step in and mess with our right to contract. And that's what a trust fundamentally is. Now, when the legislature steps in and creates trusts as well, they can create certain types of, say, well, we're going to allow you to do this in a trust or that in a trust, or not allow you to do that. They're creating legislation around trusts. Then they can also go in and change that legislation according to the trust that they created, but not trusts that are not within that purview, right? So that is why it's so important if you want to be outside of the risk of this. So Biden right now is trying to change legislation that has been around for decades regarding how trusts are taxed and how they are, and regarding the rules of trust assets, movements within the trust, distribution of trust. But these are trusts that are legislative trusts. And so there are aspects of this that he can change, right? Just the same as retirement accounts, 401ks, IRAs, those are all created by legislation, and they are legislative tools, legislative animals, I guess you could say, which is why Biden is also going after them for tax purposes. He's also trying to change the regulations around those and messing up what basically people have put their entire life plan into these retirement accounts, and with based on the assumption that these are the rules and this is how it's going to work, right? And now the legislature is coming in and saying we're going to change it. Now, normally in a contract, you would say, well, you can't do that because I agreed this and I took these actions because in reliance, this is a term in contract law, it's called reliance. I took this action in reliance that this was going to be the way you said it was and that you were going to take these actions. So I took actions relying on that. Now, the people who are going to be affected by these changes should step up and should be very angry, and they should say no. And they should say, no, you cannot make this retroactive because I set up my organization and my retirement based on my reliance that you said these were the rules and you said this is how it should work. You see? And so in contract law, we have a thing where you say, if you can take someone to court literally and say, even though we didn't have like maybe a written contract, we had an agreement. We spoke about this. We had an agreement. This is what I was going to do this and you were going to do that. And then when you come to and I took my action based on your agreement that you were going to do this, and then you didn't do what you said you were going to do. So now I'm out because I already took the action and now I'm going to suffer because you're not doing what you said. This is an equitable argument in equity means fairness, right? Because we can immediately recognize like, well, that's unfair, right? That's not fair. I did what I said I was going to do based on the fact that you had said you were going to do this thing and now you didn't do it. Okay. So that's what's going on right now with the government. The government said, we are going to handle this way. These are the rules. If you set it up like this, we're going to let you do this. And now they're changing the game. They're changing the rules. And so people who have set up their life based on that, they are SOL, right? They're in trouble. And it's really not fair. It's really not fair. But because these things are based in legislation, the legislature can go in and change them, which is why if you want real security, then you need to look for structures and base things on things that are based in pure contract, not legislative type of entities, because as the government is showing us now, they can go in and change those anytime they want. But you as the people have the power to step up and to call your legislatures and to say, I don't want this. And that's what you should be doing. You should be calling your legislatures. You should be saying, I don't agree with these legislative changes. I do not want you guys making changes to the legislation regarding our retirement accounts. Make your voices known because your representatives they are the trustees, and it is for your benefit, right? They are representing your interests as trustees. You, the people, are the beneficiaries. So you need to say, I don't want you guys changing the rules of this trust because I have already made my retirement plans based on in reliance on what you told me and how you told me the rules were going to run. So you should definitely speak up and talk to your representatives, right? And say, no, let your voice be heard. This is very, very important. It's happening right now. Okay. So when we understand the nature of this document, of the trust, of the Constitution, it can help us also to understand the nature of trusts that we can use in business and in our daily lives in ways to protect our assets and in ways to care for our children and our heirs, right? The people who come after us, or maybe it could be even charities or other types of things, causes that we love or that we want to support. So this is just a little insight into what is going on and how it actually plays out in our day-to-day, these types of concepts, things that we can think of that seem like they're far away from our daily lives, like understanding, really what is the Constitution, what are trusts, but we can bring it down and say, no, actually, these are very important to us in our day-to-day life and in how we interact. So I hope that's helpful to understand a little bit about what a trust is and why the Constitution is a trust and how to think about our representatives, right? And I think it's a good thing to call them representatives because that's what they are. They are representatives. And if they are acting in a way that is for their own good, not the good of the people, they are violating the trust. And sadly, because most politicians and representatives are what we call career politicians. It means ever since college, that's all they've done. They have been on the politician track, working in politics, working in government, being interns, moving up that ladder. They've never lived in the normal world, right? They haven't done that. They've not gone out and had a job and paid taxes in the same way as normal people do. So they're not in touch with it. And then they can think my whole career is just this, is being this, is this type of work. They think of it as a career instead of recognizing that this is just a position held as a trustee and that they are responsible to the people. This is not do whatever I can do to get ahead and to get the best salary I can and to knock out the other person in the competition because it's all about me, right? And that's what a lot of politicians think. That is the way our government is being run now. That is how they think about it. Instead of recognizing, no, this is a position I hold for a short period of time where I am a trustee and all of my actions need to be for the benefit and the good of the people, and they need to be in line with the intent of the trust that was created that allows me to be a trustee. And that's the Constitution. So there we go. That's a little talk today on the Constitution and trusts. I hope you guys have a beautiful Sunday, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.